Okay, everybody, welcome to this program on the foundations of situational awareness. Let me tell you how it was that I got the mind to create this program. Some of you have been in my programs, you know that I'm mostly a traveling presenter on the topic of situational awareness and high-risk decision-making. And once the pandemic hit, everything got shut down. So I'm at home and I thought, well, how can I give back? How can I share something with the fire service during this difficult time? And I got the idea to create this 1-hour introduction to situational awareness. This is a no selling zone. You're not signing up for anything. I'm not going to ask you to buy anything. There's no hook here. This is all purely sharing from the heart. And that's how I'm going to roll here. You're not being signed up for my newsletter, nothing like that. No catches here. This is all out of love to give back. So let me just, for those who don't know me, tell you just really quick a little bit about myself. I spent 33 years as a first responder and 22 years as an incident commander. I did my PhD research in situational awareness and high-risk decision-making. And I've authored, oops, there we go, messed it up already. I've authored 6 books on situational awareness and high-risk decision-making. If you want to learn more or have access to a whole bunch of free resources that I have available, you can visit my website, samatters.com. On there, I've got like 400 blog articles that are all free for you to use and share. I have over 300 podcast episodes where they're all free for you to listen to. So again, not trying to sell you anything. It's all there. Use those resources though. They can be really helpful for you. Oh, I've written 400 blog articles, 310 plus podcast episodes. I do have an online academy that I've had about heading now towards 6,000 graduates for the online academy version of my class, and I've trained 87,000 plus folks worldwide. So that's me. Let's jump into it. Most of my situational awareness programs are full-day classes. So what does that mean for us today? It means you're getting 1 hour of much more content that I want to share with you, but I didn't want to have an 8-hour webinar because you'd be like sticking an ink pen in your eyeball after 8 hours of sitting and listening to me. So once you're done with this, if you're inspired to learn more about this, swing by the website and immerse yourself in the free stuff that's there, the blog articles, the podcast episodes, and you'll find out there is a whole lot to be learned on the topic of situational awareness. And so this is the intro, and then you can advance it yourself as to whatever your passion would want to be. Why is situational awareness so important for individuals and teams in high-risk decision-making environments? It's because it's the foundation for good decision-making. Now, it's completely logical that the better you understand a situation, the better your decision-making will be. Duh. But there's a weird thing about situational awareness, and that is you can have terrible situational awareness, horrible situational awareness, zero situational awareness, and still make a great decision. We call that lucky. And out there in the world, there are a lot of responders who have lucked their way into successful outcomes. And I would put myself in that category as well. I'm not proud of it, but as I look back in my career, I can identify plenty of examples where I had good outcomes, but my situational awareness was horrible. But I didn't realize that till after the fact. And I looked back on it and said, man, got lucky here. So let's figure out a way to program out some of the luck and replace it with a skill set that actually improves high-risk decision-making. And that skill set is situational awareness. So let's begin with a definition of what situational awareness is. I'm seeing so much of it on the news now. Elected officials, public health officials, all saying it's important for the people to have situational awareness now in light of this pandemic. And indeed it is, but situational awareness is important in all aspects of daily life, even pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. The problem is, as they say that and people say, yes, it is, most people don't know what that means. So we're going to take the mystery out. We're going to open the curtain up and allow you to see behind this mystical term and understand exactly what it means for us. Situational awareness is your ability to perceive and to understand what is happening in the environment around you while being mindful about how time is passing. Because as time passes, conditions change. And as conditions change, then so should awareness. And this next part truly is the gold of situational awareness. And that is being able to accurately predict what's going to happen in the future and to be able to make those predictions in time to prevent a bad outcome. So as you're preparing for and working in high-risk environments, it would be helpful to keep the definition of situational awareness in mind. There's just one problem. There's a lot there to remember, and you're going to be working in an environment where there's a lot of information coming at you, and to remember all of this while you're trying to do all of your other work can be difficult. So I've made it simple. I've got it down to just 3 red highlighted words. If you can just remember those 3 red highlighted words, perceive, understand, and predict, it will make monumental advancements toward developing and maintaining your situational awareness, I promise you. But we have to understand how to do each of those 3 things. How do we perceive? How do we understand? How do we predict the future? I'm going to show you how we do that. To do that, let's start by building a house. To build a house, you have to first have a foundation. On the foundation, you put walls. On the walls, you put a roof. And that's how we're going to build situational awareness. Foundation, walls, and roof. The foundation of situational awareness, the start of it all, is what we call perception. Perception is the process by which you use your 5 senses to gather information about what's happening in the world around you. If you were to talk with somebody and ask them, do you have good situational awareness? And if they said, well, yeah, I think I do. And if you were to say, well, how do you know? Or what do you do that ensures you have good situational awareness? They might say something like, I pay attention. Or they might say, I'm always looking up, down, and all around. Or they might say, I actively listen to the things that are happening around me. Or they might say, I conduct a size up. Now, if you ask that question to anybody and they describe their situational awareness using any of these terms, they're not wrong, but they're only describing the beginning. There are 2 more component parts to situational awareness beyond paying attention. Now, here's a clue, here's a trick about the perception part of situational awareness. Don't try to take in and process and understand everything about what's happening in your environment. You will get overloaded and overwhelmed. So here's a situational awareness best practice straight up front on the top of the program. Focus on the 5 to 7 most important, most critical pieces of information. If you try to process the meaning of dozens or hundreds of pieces of information, you will get overloaded, overwhelmed, mentally fatigued, and your brain may even just shut down and say, I just can't take any more information. And you literally can experience something called analysis paralysis. So in your high-risk environment, focus on a small number of the really most important pieces of information. And there's science behind why that number is 5 to 7 and has to do with the limits of short-term memory. And I'm not going to be able to get into the detail of that in this program, but know that there's science behind that number of 5 to 7. So you got 5 senses always on, always gathering information. very few of us have probably ever paused to wonder, how does the outside world get into that 3-pound little blob of clay that we call the brain? And then how do we make sense out of it all? Well, I'm gonna take the mystery out of it, and I'm gonna use vision as the example. So to be able to see anything, there has to be light. In the absence of all light, in total darkness, we can't see anything. There has to be light to stimulate nerves inside of our eyes. So as the light comes into our eyes, it stimulates these nerves. These nerves then take the rays of light and turn the rays of light into electricity and send those electrical impulses back to the part of the brain that controls our vision, which happens to be in the back of your brain. So the brain is trying to make a sense of everything as just electrical impulses. Nothing more. No light gets inside your brain. None. All the light ends at the eye. No sound gets inside your brain. All the sound ends at the ears. It all has to do with the brain processing and making meaning out of electrical information. All right, back to perception. Perception is perhaps the easiest part of situational awareness. All you have to do is be conscious, alert, oriented, and looking around, scanning your environment, or as somebody might say as a cliche, keeping your head on a swivel. But there's a problem. It's not always easy, intuitive, or obvious as to what we should be paying attention to, especially in environments that are dynamically changing. Sometimes we might be looking off to the left, but that which is going to cause us harm is something off to the right. And what we're paying attention to on the left, we might perceive to be the most important thing, but that which is going to bite us is something that's happening over on the right, and we're not paying attention to it at all. So your 5 senses are all gathering up pieces to a jigsaw puzzle. The eyes gather up some of the pieces, nose, mouth, skin, all gathering up pieces to a jigsaw puzzle, trying to send the jigsaw puzzle pieces into the brain to a destination where the jigsaw puzzle gets assembled. And when those pieces, all those separate pieces from the 5 senses, all reach the destination and they all get put together, we advance to the second part of the situational awareness development continuum, the walls of the house that we're building, so to speak. And that is what we call understanding. Understanding means making sense out of what we see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. Sometimes that's called comprehension. Sometimes that's called having a moment of clarity. So as you're in your environment and the puzzle pieces all come together, in your mind, you get a clear, I'll use a cliche, a clear picture of understanding of what is happening. So as you're trying to understand what's happening in your world, you might ask yourself a couple of questions. Now, as I say, ask yourselves these questions, I don't mean figuratively, I mean literally. Use the little voice inside your head that we call self-speak and ask yourself a couple of questions. Questions like, what does this mean? I see it, but what's the deeper meaning? I heard this said, but what's the deeper meaning? There's always a deeper meaning beyond what we see or what we hear. And we see and hear the world in a 2-dimensional format, but there's always the third dimension of, like when we're listening to someone, there's always the third dimension of intent. What did they intend to say that they didn't? What about their body language? What about their voice inflection? Sometimes silence sends a message. And we might ask someone a question and we might get silence, and that silence means something. And then we have to infer what that meaning is. So the second question that we ask ourselves is this what I expected? We come into every situation with expectations, which is good. It keeps us from being surprised or caught off guard. But expectations can also be bad. very bad. And let me explain how. If you come into a situation with expectations that something is happening, you may see what you expect to see happening, even though it's not happening. If you expect to hear someone say something to you, you may hear them say that, even though they didn't say that. If you don't expect to hear somebody say something, if you expect them to say it and they didn't say it, you'll hear it even though they didn't say it. Our brain has a way of playing these tricks on us that can cause us to hallucinate, see things and hear things that aren't really happening based on expectations. How in the world does this happen? We have two sets of eyes. We have our biological eyes and we have our mind's eye. The biological eyes see the world as it really is. The biological ears hear the world as it really is. But the mind's eye, or the mind's ears, hears and sees what it wants to hear and see based on past experiences, based on training, based on biases, based on prejudices, based on expectations. So when we're paying attention in the world, there's a good possibility we're only seeing and hearing a partial representation of what's really happening, and the rest of our understanding is based on what our mind thinks is really being said or happening. It seems so easy. All we need to do is see things and understand, or hear things and understand, but it isn't that easy. And what makes it so challenging are these things that I call barriers. Barriers are anything that block or prevent your ability to have perception, understanding, or prediction. And when I did my research, I uncovered almost 100 situational awareness barriers. Now, we're not going to cover but just a couple of those in the program today. But when you go to my website, you can learn about all of them on there in the blogs and the podcasts and such. And again, it's all free. So you got nothing but time. Well, most of us have nothing but time on our hands. Immerse yourself in the learning that's available there for free. So let me introduce you to one of the situational awareness barriers. It's called sensory conflict. Sensory conflict means the inputs coming into your brain from two or more of your senses are not in agreement with each other. They're in conflict. So stated another way, the puzzle pieces aren't fitting together. So for example, your ears hear something that tells you what is going on here is condition A. But at the same time, your eyes see something that says, no. What is going on here is not condition A, it's condition B. Now we have sensory conflict because the inputs coming in are not in agreement. The jigsaw puzzle pieces aren't fitting together. What happens when the jigsaw puzzle pieces don't fit together? Well, when they do fit together, it's amazing. We have comprehension, understanding, moments of clarity. When they don't fit together, we have confusion. And there's one thing that I can tell you for sure is that if you're working in an environment that is stressful, your brain does not like you to be confused, especially if there's risk combined with stress. Because what your brain knows is if you're stressed and in a risky environment, confusion makes you vulnerable to be hurt or killed. So your brain is going to try to resolve this confusion quickly. Now, one of the things it can do to try to resolve this confusion is it can shift your awareness. Shift it from what is happening around you, shift it from your paying attention to the things that are happening in your environment, and the shift becomes internal. You start to have an awareness about the fact that you are confused, that you don't really understand what is happening. Your awareness shifts from an external awareness to an internal awareness. And when your awareness shifts from external to internal, you can experience another situational awareness barrier called mind drift. Mind drift means physically you are present, mentally you're somewhere else. The human mind will drift many times every day. Chances are good your mind is going to drift during this 1 hour program. I can't stop it, and neither can you. And you might be sitting there thinking, Rich, don't take any offense to this, Rich, but if I got to sit through your 1 hour boring virtual program, my mind is going to drift. Sorry, it's okay. I don't take offense to it. But then you might be thinking, if I was doing something high risk and high consequence, I would never let my mind drift because there's too much potential bad if I let my mind drift during a high risk activity. Well, that's a wish. Your mind can drift away when you're doing highly risky work. Now, I don't know that for sure, but I'm going to give you a scenario to just contemplate for a moment. Have you ever gotten into your vehicle, driven somewhere? Maybe the trip took an hour or two, arrived at your destination, and then sat there in momentary wonderment that part of that trip you have no memory of. You completely zoned out. So essentially what you were doing is driving the vehicle without paying attention to the conscious act of driving the vehicle. You were driving the vehicle subconsciously, while your conscious mind drifted away onto something else. This can happen to us when we're doing high-risk activity, especially if we get confused. Our awareness can shift inward. Now, there's good news here. As your conscious awareness shifts internal, your subconscious can take over and say, I can do this for you. I can drive the vehicle for you using subconscious programming, using stored experiences of previous driving knowledge as stored as experiences in the mind. And every one of your driving experiences are stored in there, whether you can remember it or not, they're in there. And it can tap into those and help us to drive the vehicle robotically, essentially to be acting without thinking. We can literally, and you know you've done this, I've done this, literally drive the car without thinking about the act of driving. So this access to our unconscious stored knowledge allows us to do something without thinking about it consciously, as long as we have a lot of experiences stored in there of doing that activity, which can help us to act without thinking. That's good. Keeps us from getting into accidents. But it can also be bad because it can cause us to act without thinking. And in a high risk, high consequence environment, sometimes acting without thinking leads to tragedy. And sometimes those who are looking from the outside might even ask that critical question, what were you thinking when you did that? And the truth of the matter is, we might not have been thinking at all. We might have literally been acting automatic, like a robot or a human robot, an automaton. We don't want to think that we would go full automatic, but the mind drift, the stress of a situation, and our stored experiences of our habits and routines can cause it to happen. So where in the brain does the puzzle of understanding get assembled? There's got to be some place where all those jigsaw puzzle pieces come together, and there is a place where it happens. It's the place in the brain where you have consciousness. It is also the place in the brain where you form your conscious awareness. And it's the place in the brain where you develop your situational awareness. So it's a pretty important part of the real estate up there. And I want to tell you about what happens where the puzzle gets assembled. Now, the place where the puzzle gets assembled has a geographic location in the brain, but I don't like to teach using brain anatomy terminology. I like to keep it simple and use analogies like building a house and jigsaw puzzle pieces. So the analogy that I use for where in the brain we form our situational awareness is an Etch-a-Sketch. An Etch-a-Sketch truly is a magic screen, just like it says up on the top of the toy. Everything you see, hear, feel, taste, and smell travels down 5 highways and lands on your Etch-a-Sketch as a picture. And then the picture becomes the pieces that get put together to form our understanding. So you have this picture, and I just put a picture up there of a fire because I know many of the folks that are in the program today are firefighters. You have this picture of understanding that's been assembled on your sketch pad. That picture is then snapshotted or screenshotted and sent up into memory to do a search of your long-term memory database, essentially asking, do I have any previous knowledge about this kind of a problem and how to solve this kind of problem? So it searches your entire long-term memory. Now, how big is long-term memory? Huge. The capacity of the average person's long-term memory is estimated to be about 10 times all the information stored on the internet. Think about that. Massive. Accessing that information is a whole other issue. I can almost hear some of you chuckling now. You can only consciously access about 5% of your long-term memory database, which means 95% of everything you've learned in life is outside of your conscious awareness. So here's a little memory jog for you. Do you remember where you were and what you were doing on the morning of September 11th, 2001, when the planes hit the World Trade Center towers? So I'm going to glance over now to the chat box and let some of you chat in whether some of you might not be old enough to remember that, and I respect that. But if you are old enough to have remembered, that you can remember the details of September 11th, 2001, go ahead and put in the chat box that you, oh, yes, was working at the Army, 8th grade band class, driving a forklift. Holy cows, man, lots and lots of memory. Yes, I was on duty at the fire department, was working on the ambulance, was in 5th grade, high school English class. I was out in the yard mowing. I was at the gym. It was a Tuesday morning, was in high school history class, was at Penn State for a job fair. All right, so at the fire station, lots. I was on my way to a union event. Holy cow. So 6th grade current events class, was on the golf course. Lucky you. Lots of memory. All right. So stay near your chat box for a moment. If you remember that, that's in the 5% of your conscious memory. And for most of us old enough to remember that event, we remember that because of 2 things, stress related to it and repetition. The more times we've remembered that event, the more it takes a permanent home in the 5% of memory. So all you that chimed in, stand by. I'm going to give you another swing at this. Do you remember where you were and what you were doing on the morning of August 11th, 2001, just 30 days earlier than September 11th? And I'll give you a hint. It was a Saturday. Now, chime in on the box if you remember. No clue, no idea, no clue. Sorry, nope, no clue, nope. Coming home from vacation. Sleeping. No idea. My sister's birthday party. Okay, good memory on that. I was on my honeymoon. I was on a camping trip. But even for those that remember some event of that day, you probably don't have the detail that you remember from September 11th. And there's a reason for that. If you don't have much memory of that day, then the memory of that day, August 11th, it's still in there, but it's in the 95% of memory called the subconscious memory. So when you look at the database of memory and you say, how big is conscious memory? How big is subconscious? Subconscious is huge, literally massive compared to everything that we can remember in the consciousness. So you got that picture on your sketch pad that is snapshotted, sent up into memory, and if it finds a match that's part of the 95% that's outside of conscious awareness, it can trigger the sixth sense. The sixth sense is the only sense that resides inside the brain and sends information outward. The other five senses are all on the outside of the brain and send information inward. That sixth sense on the inside of the brain, it has a name. We call it intuition. Now, the definition for intuition is strange. Intuition means knowing. Without knowing, how you know. What? How do you know if you don't know how you know? Intuition does not come to us as knowledge. Intuition comes to us as a feeling. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how you can experience intuitive knowledge. First, you might have the hair stand up on the back of your neck, goosebumps go down your arms, your spidey senses start to tingle. That's a form of intuition of your brain telling you that there is something that is matched in the subconscious that is raising your vigilance, raising your level of alertness. You also might have the voices inside of your head start to talk to you. That internal voice called self-speak might start to try to give you good counsel and say things like, maybe we shouldn't be here. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Do you really think this is a good idea? The internal voice is trying its best to give us good counsel. But the most common form of intuition, while you can experience either of these or both of these, the most common form of intuition is the gut feel. That knotted up, squeezed up feeling in our gut telling us that something isn't right. The gut feeling is a biological connection between the emotional control center of your brain that's connected to nerve impulses that come down the spinal cord and split off and come into the abdomen. So when you get that knotted up, squeezed up gut feeling, that's a biological response to a pattern match of subconscious knowledge trying to give us a warning that we might not be doing something that's safe or smart. Your intuition is truly your brain's single most powerful red flag warning system designed to alert you to the potential for danger. And what makes it so powerful is how big the unconscious database is compared to our conscious database. All right, I'm going to pause now and take some questions. So if you have some questions, some of the questions I might hold to the end and just answer them at the end of the program. So the questions would be about anything that I have covered up to this point. So Kathy asks, you were ahead of me on this, Kathy, is there a sixth sense known as intuition/gut feeling? I have a sense that you asked that question before I got to that slide, because now you know that there is, and in fact, it is very powerful if only we would trust it, because sometimes we don't trust our gut and trust our intuition, which is sad because it's such a large and powerful database. So Gerald asks, could intuition be synonymous with consciousness? No, intuition is synonymous with subconsciousness. So if you experience something consciously, it's not from intuition, Gerald. If you experience it consciously, it's in that little 5% wedge of conscious awareness. Like I say, I can remember my wife's face and my wife's name and her cell phone number. That's all consciousness. But if I meet somebody, like there's happened to me so many times, I've been in a program and I will see somebody and I recognize them, but I don't know their name and I don't know how I know them and I don't know where I know them from. But I've pattern matched in subconscious knowledge stored there that face. And I'll walk up to them and I'll say, I know you from somewhere. We have met before. And they'll say, yeah, I was, in your program 3 years ago. Now, do I have such a good memory that I remember this person from 3 years ago? No, if I actually remembered them, that'd be in my 5% conscious memory. My sketchpad drew a picture of their face, searched my database, and found a pattern match to that person's face, giving me that intuitive feeling that I know them, but not the conscious awareness of who they are or how I know them. So the intuition is synonymous with the subconscious and not the conscious. So here's a question. So intuition is our brain's method of trying to access the 95% of information that we can't regularly access. Lou, gold star for you. You're on your way to getting an A in the class. That is exactly correct. The intuition is the access to the information that you cannot readily, consciously access. However, you can pull information from the subconscious and bring it into the conscious. Those are what are called flashbulb moments. Flashbulb moments occur when we are moments occur when we are reminded of something that had been stored off in the subconscious, and then it just comes back into like, wow, I hadn't thought about that for such a very long time. Like if I said, do you remember the name of your first grade teacher? And if you're like, oh yeah, now that you mention it, now that you ask it, I was able to do a quick search and find the name of that teacher that I hadn't thought about in 20 years or 30 years. So in a flashbulb moment, it can bring something back into conscious awareness, and then it'll make its way back into the subconscious again. And my office manager, Carol, asked, just dropped me a note that said there's some questions being asked in the chat as well. So you folks in the chat, if you want to go over to the Q&A and ask your questions that you're asking in the chat, go ahead and ask them over into the Q&A. Then I can see that and be better able to help you in the Q&A by asking them there. So here's a question. Does recognizing intuition or gut feeling as a legitimate source of decision-making increase or decrease situational awareness or positive outcomes? Well, in theory, well, or even practicality, it would improve our decision-making because it's accessing a larger database of knowledge. It's accessing things that you learned in a class 8 years ago, and you don't even remember taking the class. But as long as you were conscious, alert, and oriented in the class, you were storing memories of those experiences. Now, the reason I say in theory is because intuition may not always be 100% accurate. There's nothing such as always and never as it relates to how our brain functions. Go back to that example where I walked up to somebody in a class and I said, I know you, we have met before, where have we met? And if that person says, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong, I've never met you, I assure you that we have never met before. Well, what can happen is that person's facial features are a close match to facial features of someone else I know, which I don't remember who because it's all happening in the subconscious. But what I get is this feeling that I have met this person before, that I know this person, where in fact, I don't. So while intuition can be powerful, it is not perfect. But if I were to give advice to somebody, I would say, trust your intuition, trust your gut, especially when you're in a high risk, high stress environment, because what a lot of people do is they dismiss their intuition and dismiss their gut. But if you're in a high risk situation and your brain is telling you you're in danger and you need to leave and you shouldn't be doing this, we should probably listen to it because it's matching up something in the subconscious, even though we may not know the origin of that lesson. Somewhere in there, we have a lesson that says, this is not something smart that I should be doing. Okay, another question. You mentioned expectations and how the brain perceives expectations not based on realities. Is the intuition not based on previous experiences that lead us to learning about expected outcomes based on those past experiences? I'm going to have to spend a little time with that one, Richard. That's a long question, and I'm not quite, I'm not saying you didn't ask it right. You probably did ask it right. My brain just isn't churning a good answer to that at the moment. So I'm gonna hold that one and come back to it. It's just a little bit more to think about than I'm able to do right here in the moment. So how do we interpret the difference between intuition saying don't be here and other responses like fear or concern or task loading or tunnel vision? Task loading and tunnel vision aren't necessarily connected to intuition, but we'll set that aside for a moment. If you're going to have trust in your internal voice, you need to filter and prioritize, and it's hard. Yes, it is. You need to be able to justify your decisions post-event. Yeah, imagine, Josh, you making a decision that some of you are firefighters, some of you aren't, so I'll use a firefighting example. You're in charge of a fire, you get a gut feeling that something's going to happen and the building is going to collapse, and you order everyone out. Everyone out. Why? Everyone out. And they come out and they say, why'd you order me out? I say, I had a gut feeling the building was going to collapse, so I ordered you out. But then the building doesn't collapse. You're going to be criticized. But what if you get a gut feeling that the building's going to collapse and you order them out, and as they're coming out, right at the front door, as they're coming out, the building falls down behind them. And they come up to you and say, how'd you know? Your answer would be the same. I just had a gut feeling. So we can choose to trust the gut in environments of risk and consequence and take an action that could save our lives, or we can choose to dismiss the gut and take our chances. And it is a hard decision, but it's your decision to make. I used to not always trust my gut, but I trust my gut a whole lot more now than I ever did before. You know, that's my answer to that. So now what I'm going to do, and I got lots more questions coming in. So so I try to stay on time and not go too far past our advertised end time of 1 hour. I'm going to set the questions aside. I'm going to keep the program going, and then I'm going to stick around as long as we need to at the end to have conversations and discussions to your heart's content. But I don't want to hold people here longer than need be unnecessarily. So I'm going to pause the questions and keep the program going on. I'll get to your questions, I promise. It'll just be at the end. And if you type the question in the chat box, swing over to the Q&A and put your question in the Q&A box, and that way I can be sure to answer it there. All right, perception is the foundation. Understanding are the walls. Now we have to put a roof on the house. The roof is the highest and perhaps most complex part of the situational awareness development continuum, and that is prediction, being able to anticipate future events before they happen. How do we do that? I'm going to give you a formula, a recipe for how to predict the future with a disclaimer. If you do this, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to accurately predict the future of every event. It's just not possible. And anybody that's going to tell you that they can teach you that is probably going to try to sell you snake oil. But what I'm going to do is give you a recipe that can improve the probability of your prediction of future events accurately. Begin with the end in mind. To begin with the end in mind means to begin on the front end of whatever we're doing with a target, a goal, an objective, or a benchmark. So we arrive at a situation before we engage in doing any activity, we pause and think about the end result. What do I want success to look like? And you might think, well, doesn't everybody do that? No, not everybody does. And if you do, I'm proud of you, good for you. To begin with the end in mind says, here's what success looks like. Then mentally transport yourself to that successful ending, turn around and look back toward the beginning and look for landmines or obstacles that could stand in the way of you being able to predict the future. To begin with the end in mind says, I'm going to start with the outcome and look backwards toward the problem. And when you do this, you will see things differently than when you're looking forward to a problem. It works. And in fact, Stephen Covey coined that phrase, begin with the end in mind, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I used to call it something else, and I borrowed Stephen's term with credit to him, because begin with the end in mind is so powerful to being able to anticipate outcomes. Now, as you try to begin with the end in mind, there's a couple situational awareness barriers here that are going to rear their ugliness on the front end of a incident when you're trying to get to the end and look back toward the beginning, and that is distractions, interruptions, and task fixation. Distractions are anything to pull your attention away unexpectedly and accidentally. Loud noises, sirens, explosions, air horns, fans, saws, people screaming, distractions. Interruptions are anything to pull your attention away on purpose. Somebody comes up to talk to you, somebody calls you on a radio, somebody text messages you or calls your cell phone. That's an interruption. Or task fixation. And that is getting narrowly focused on the task that you're performing, so narrowly focused on the task that you're performing that you don't take the time to look out into the future. And in other words, you're fixated on the task in the moment and not giving consideration to what's going to happen 2 minutes from now, 5 minutes from now. Ask yourself, where is this event headed? Whatever that event is that you're at, where is this event headed if we didn't do anything but watch? Now imagine if you're a first responder, if this sounds a whole lot like I told you to show up at the scene of an emergency and do nothing. No, this is not a strategy. This is a mindset. By asking yourself, where's this event headed if I don't do anything but watch, it forces your thinking into the future. It forces you to think about, well, if I didn't do anything, what's going to happen 2 minutes from now, 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now? And it gets you outside of the current moment, and using your mind's eye, which I had talked about earlier, it allows you to kind of play the movie ahead and see what's going to happen on the horizon. Just like when you're driving a car, you look 800 or 1,000 feet out in front of the car, you're looking into the future to see what's going to happen up the road, so that if there is something there, you have time to react, time to brake, time to swerve. How long is it going to take for an undesirable outcome to occur? So if you look into the future and you see a potential bad outcome, how long is that going to take? What we're talking about here is a window of opportunity. So if a window of opportunity is closing because conditions are changing, and once the window closes, I'm not going to be able to fix the problem or change the outcome. I have to look and say, do I have time to engage this problem and fix it before the window of opportunity closes? And some windows of opportunity close slow, some close fast, some are closed by the time we inherit the problem, and we're not going to be able to fix it at all. It's a done deal. So we're giving consideration to how much time do we have before something undesirable occurs. Every event that we deal with unfolds at a certain speed, a certain pace, and it's critical for us to keep track of the passage of time. So critical, in fact, that I built that into the definition of situational awareness. Situational awareness is your ability to perceive and understand what's happening in the environment around you while being mindful of how time passes. It's a critical component of awareness. In fact, tracking the passage of time means we're tracking how fast our windows of opportunity are closing. Then we have to set some expectations. The expectations are set by answering some questions like, can we change this outcome? Can I actually fix this problem? Can I do something that's going to make this better? I want to, but can I? So here's a piece of advice for all of us that are facing challenging situations like emergency calls that we've been called to try to fix a problem. Don't get in the way of outcomes that you can't change. That's what I saw in so many of the fatality reports that I evaluated, more than 500 of them, is first responders were getting in the way of outcomes that they couldn't change. Their heart was in the right place. They wanted to change it. They wanted to fix it, but they just couldn't. If you get in the way of an outcome that you can't change, you're going to become a victim of the outcome. It's going to occur anyhow, and it's going to take you down with it. Are the conditions right? So the conditions drive the actions. So here what we're saying is if the conditions are right, then be aggressive about fixing the problem. Jump in there, do your woo magic, and get the problem fixed if the conditions are right to do so. But if the conditions are not right, then be conservative. Live to fight another day. What I would call be smart aggressive. Smart aggressive means first assess the problem, first develop awareness, and then make a decision as to whether an action fits the conditions. And we're action-oriented people. We want to take aggressive steps to fix problems for people, but sometimes that aggressive action doesn't fit the conditions that we have inherited. You didn't create the conditions, you inherit them. But let's assess them and make sure it's right to be aggressive. Do we have the right resources? Think about the organization that you work in and answer for yourself this question. Are all the people I work with equal in knowledge, skills, abilities, fitness, and stamina? Chances are your answer is no. Everyone's answer, I think, would be no. We're all equal in the eyes of our Creator, but not equal in knowledge, in skills, and abilities. Different people come with different levels of experience, different fitness, different stamina. And if we are not all equal in those abilities, then let's not hold the same expectations as if everyone has the same knowledge. If you hold the same expectation of the knowledge of a 30-year experienced person to a 30-day experienced person, it's a setup for failure. If you hold the same expectation of me as a 60-year-old for physical stamina that you hold for an 18 or 19-year-old, it's going to be a setup for failure because I can't perform to that level. At one time in my life I could, but I can't now. What we develop is 5 different awarenesses. First is personal awareness, your knowledge of you, your fitness, your stamina, your knowledge, skills, abilities. The look in the mirror that says, where am I at? Where do I need to be? What do I need to do to get me from where I am to the expert level that I need to be? Team awareness, that's the awareness of the other people that you work with and their abilities and limitations. Resource awareness, the awareness of the other people, or the resource awareness is the awareness of all the non-human things that we depend upon in our work environment, and knowing how all of that equipment, tools, monitors, apparatus, how all of it works, its limitations and its abilities. The 4th awareness is the actual incident or the problem that we're dealing with at the moment. And the 5th awareness is shared awareness, making sure everybody's on the same page of understanding, a common operating picture. Can we operate faster than the conditions are changing? Stated another way, can we operate faster than the windows are closing on us? So to be able to predict the future, we have to use our imagination. Our imagination is using our mind's eye to see what's going to happen before it actually occurs. So let me sum up the situational awareness development process. I know we're like right at the 1 hour mark. I'm going to sum up the process, then I'm going to open the Q&A up again. And if you want to stay, you can. And if you need to go, I'll understand. So let me sum the process up. It begins with perception. Perception is gathering intel, gathering information, seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling. The proverbial statement, we connect the dots. Perception is collecting the dots, gathering the intel. Understanding, the second part, the walls of the house, is the assembly of the jigsaw puzzle, or the connecting of the dots. And I apologize for mixing my metaphors there, whichever one you prefer to go with, connecting dots or assembling jigsaw puzzles. Once the puzzle is assembled on the sketch pad, then we search our memory database for solutions, past experiences, past training, past knowledge that we have stored in there. Over the course of our lifetime, it's searching the entire long-term subconscious memory database, trying to find access to solutions. If the solution comes to us consciously, that's in the little 5% wedge. If the solution comes to us intuitively, then that's what the knowledge that's coming to us from the 95% wedge, in the form of a feeling. Then we make a decision. A decision is a choice from at least two options. We should always have two options whenever we have a decision to make. And as we're talking in the parlance of high risk decision making, those two options should be an aggressive option and a conservative option. So if your aggressive option doesn't work, you have a fallback of a conservative option. Now, after you make a decision, what should you do? Well, people would say, after you make a decision, you take an action. Make a decision, take an action. Please don't do that. Don't do that. What I want you to do is make a decision and then pause for just a moment and make a prediction. See, we're inserting a step between decision and action, and that is the prediction. That's what keeps us from going full on automatic mode, robotic action to deal with a problem. We want to insert that step, and that step can just be a second or two or three, to make a prediction, to visualize the outcome of our decision option before we implement it. Use our predictions to drive our actions. If your predicted outcome of an aggressive option is good, then implement the aggressive option. But if the predicted outcome of your aggressive option is bad, you took a moment to look into the future, or start with the end in mind and look back, and you see a lot of bad potential, then look for other options before you implement and just go down the road of a bad option. Look for other second option, third option, and include the consideration for your conservative choice. But always have a conservative choice in your mind to think about. All right, that concludes the program. We are just a hair over the 1 hour mark. So what I want to do is just leave this slide up here for just a moment. So if you want to capture or screenshot my access information, my email, my phone number. I'm on social media, also on Instagram. I don't have that logo up there yet, but I'm also there. There's my website, all kinds of free resources on the website for you as well. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch back over to the Q&A mode. This is being recorded, and I am going to send a recording out to everyone who attended, so you don't feel obligated that you have to stay. But I do want to say a couple things before you cut out. One is, if you want to attend again, you can. If you want to share this link, I'm doing this live 12 times. This is the first of 12 live events. So if somebody comes to the next one, they're not just getting the pre-recorded, they're getting me live doing it again. So if you want to share this link with others, if you have kids that are home and you're thinking of how do I educate them and do some homeschooling, enroll them in this and make them sit through this, because some of them someday are going to be driving your car. And situational awareness might be pretty important as they're driving your vehicle. So if you want to share this link with kids in school, and I promise I'll keep it G-rated. You notice I didn't cuss or go down any tangents of anything that would embarrass any parent. It's going to be professionally done. Share it with others that might want to get this. So yeah, I'll make it available to anyone and everyone. So now I'm going to take some of the questions, and let me just scroll down through. Okay, so Richard, I promised I'd come back to your question. So, buddy, I'm going to swing back to it now, read it slowly, and try to get you an answer. You mentioned expectations and how the brain perceives expectations not based on reality. Perhaps, not always or never, but it can base it not on reality, but on what we perceive the reality to be. Is the intuition not based on previous experiences? Yes, it is. That lead us to learning about expected outcomes based on those past experiences. Yes, it does. But we don't always have a perfect match between past experiences and the current situation that we're dealing with. You can have a perfect match or a near perfect match, but sometimes we don't. And sometimes what the brain pulls out of subconscious doesn't necessarily match the current situation. It might say, well, this is close enough, and it might then guide us to an action that is not appropriate for the current situation. So intuition is not perfect. It's powerful. It's valuable. Even our conscious knowledge is not perfect. We can recall things consciously and get it wrong, a slip of the mind, a slip of the tongue. So there's nothing perfect always or never about intuition. But I will tell you this, is I trust my gut emphatically now, where I didn't always before. And sometimes it didn't turn out well because I didn't trust my gut. But I've learned now to trust my gut and to trust my intuition. So here's a question. How would you compare this to my life flashed before my eyes in a near-death situation? Jason, that's an amazingly great question. So when you've heard people say in a near-death situation, my life flashed before my eyes, and in fact, Jason, in classes, I've interviewed people who've had their life flash before their eyes. The one that I remember was a soldier who was in a firefight, and he said during the firefight, he got wounded, and in his mind's eye, he started to see things from his childhood, riding a bicycle, eating a piece of apple pie, being bounced on his grandpa's lap. Now, he's in a firefight, in a war, and these are the things that he's seeing in his mind's eye. And you might say, well, how or why does that happen? And the truth of it is the explanation is very easy to understand. When you're under stress and your brain is searching for solutions to problems, it's searching the full database of all your experiences. And for some people, not all, for some of you, may have, if your life has ever flashed before your eyes, go over into the chat box and say that it has, so we know if there's someone on the call that it has happened for. But for some people, that subconscious experience of childhood, while it's searching for experiences, will pop into consciousness. And sometimes only just for a moment. There they are riding a bike, there they are eating a piece of pie, there they are being on grandpa's lap. And some of those subconscious experiences come into consciousness, and people relive them in the moment. And they say, my life flashed before my eyes. And that truly is a real phenomena that can happen. So here's a question: does stress disable being able to access some long-term memories? I think what you're saying here, Calvin, if I could paraphrase the question, and if I get it wrong, just go back into the Q&A and type it again if I get it wrong. But what I think I hear you saying is, can we experience a stressful event that the brain can then package away in a way that we don't remember that stressful or traumatic event? And the answer to that is yes, it can. And it does this for a very good reason. It's to try to keep us from reliving trauma from bad experiences. So it can tuck it away. Now, people who experience post-traumatic stress, one of the biological challenges that happens here, and it is biological, it's not psychological, post-traumatic stress injury, is that some of those traumatic experiences don't get locked away. They roam around freely and come into consciousness time and time and time again. And in my longer program, I explain more about post-traumatic stress injuries and how it happens, and offer some suggestions for how people can get some help for that. In fact, I'm thinking about doing a podcast episode upcoming and interview a couple of psychologists who work with first responders on post-traumatic stress. My podcast is mostly about near-miss events and what we learn from near misses, but I think that there's enough happening with first responders with post-traumatic stress injuries that I am going to dedicate an episode to that, to speak just to that challenge. But yes, if that was your question, stress can, I don't know if you'd call it disable the access to the information, but stress can cause that experience to be kind of tucked away in a place that is impossible or difficult to access. And that's where a flashbulb moment can bring something back into consciousness, just a sound or a smell, and then that stressed event can be brought back and a person can see that event in their mind and relive the stresses of that experience. Question, do you find that younger and experienced firefighters are more prone to dismiss their intuitive thoughts due to the lack of self-confidence in experience or ability? Well, Lou, great question. Let me say one thing, that the less experience you have, the less data points you have to trigger intuition. So say, for example, you have a brand new firefighter with a highly experienced firefighter, and they're going to go into a burning building. The highly experienced firefighter with a bunch of data points of knowledge can do a risk assessment and say, this is a safe decision for us to make this entry. Where the inexperienced firefighter, who does not have that collective knowledge and data points, their primal brain is going to say, run from danger. Back when we were learning how to survive in a hostile environment, we didn't run toward the saber-toothed tiger. We ran away from it. We ran from danger. So that person who lacks those experiences, lacks the intuition, lacks the knowledge of risk assessment and risk management to know what is an acceptable level of discomfort or risk versus what is acceptable. And that's where the newer, younger person so depends upon you to help them because of how rich your database is of knowledge. Now, the second part of your question is, do younger people tend to dismiss their intuition more readily? I don't know if there's science behind that, so I will use myself as the quintessential younger person at one time in my life. And I would say when I was younger, I did not trust my intuition. I didn't trust my gut. But I don't know if it was because I was cocky or felt invulnerable to bad outcomes. I think really it was just that I didn't understand what intuition was and where it came from and how valuable it is and how much it can help me. So I tended to trust my cocky consciousness over my much wiser subconscious intuition. Now, as I've gotten older and as I've learned more about the neural foundation of intuition, it's a lot easier for me now to trust it. And in fact, when I teach people, I strongly encourage them when they're in high risk environments to trust their intuition and trust their gut and trust the internal voice giving them good counsel, because there's so much potential bad outcome that it can occur if they don't trust it. And if they do trust it and then the tragedy doesn't happen, well, the only bad outcome is maybe they get criticized. Then I realize for some that's a significant outcome to get criticized when they trust their gut and it ends up being proved to be wrong. So here's what it says in reference to my first question. Many new officer trainings warn us of the danger of conditioned responses. Is the use of intuition in conflict with this message of the importance of the OODA loop? Okay, so let me pause and say what the OODA loop is. It was created by a fighter pilot named John Boyd. And John said that we develop, or we could and should use something called an OODA loop, which is OODA, O-O-D-A, stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. In fact, I wrote an article on my blog, free for you to access, that discusses the OODA loop, because what I did is I offered a suggestion for an enhanced OODA loop, which will tie into something that we talked about just previously in the class, which would be observe, orient, decide, predict, then act. But it doesn't make such a good acronym like OODPA. So I would say to enhance the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, make a prediction of the decision outcome, and then take the action. So conditioned responses can be good. I don't want to put the mind out there that just because we do something automatically or without conscious thought that it's a bad thing. Think about driving your car without conscious thought. If it was always a bad thing, we'd be getting into wrecks everywhere, and everybody else on the road, their minds are drifting too, and they're driving their vehicles mostly subconsciously. So this conditioned automatic responses is not always a bad thing. It can be a good thing as well. It can save our lives because it can cause us, if we're trained properly with good stored experiences, it can cause us to just act so fast that we do something without really even taking time to think and process what we're doing, and it's life-saving. So is there a danger of conditioned responses? There can be, because if the conditions that you're dealing with don't match your conditioned response, you could end up implementing your conditioned response without thinking. So what I'm saying is that even though our intuition is guiding us, don't stop thinking. You can still think. In fact, if I got, the hair that stood up on the back of my neck or a gut feeling, I would use that questioning mindset that I went through in the third part of awareness when we're asking ourselves a series of questions and saying to myself, tying back to the first question, what does this mean? I got a bad gut feeling right now. What does this mean? What is my experience trying to tell me? What are the dangers that are around me that my mind has picked up on and triggered a response from my subconscious that is making me feel this way? And try to unpackage that a little bit with some conscious thought. All right, so here's what it says. Those who mentored me told me repeatedly, make a decision, good or bad. A decision can be learned from. Failure to make a decision can not be helped and won't help anyone. Is that something you agree with? Well, yes, I agree with always make a decision, but don't make a hasty decision. So as that person told you repeatedly, make a decision, I hope they didn't teach you to make a rushed decision. And there's a difference there. And that difference is that what I would teach somebody is to first develop situational awareness, understand the problem before you throw a solution at it. And that's what situational awareness allows us to do. It allows us to collect puzzle pieces and assemble them. It allows us to collect dots and connect them. It allows us to gather intel that becomes the foundation for a good decision. But in contrast, Lou, to what that person told you, I will tell you this from my own experience. What I learned, especially in leadership, having administrated a fire department for 22 years, sometimes the best thing I can do is make no decision. Sometimes it's better for me to leave a problem unsolved than to try to solve the problem and make two more problems with the solution that I made to the problem. Every person who comes to me with a problem doesn't warrant a decision that solves that problem. Sometimes problems aren't solvable. Sometimes my decision will make things worse than leaving the problem as it was. So I won't say that it's essential to always make a decision under every circumstance, when sometimes the best decision is to just shift into neutral and let things play out for a little bit of time to see how things are going to resolve on their own. And I'm maybe going down a little bit of more of a leadership track here. But I think being decisive is a good quality of a leader or a commander. But I wouldn't be hasty about jumping too quickly into decisions without at least first forming situational awareness. Here's one that says, can you share your website again, please? Yes. I am going to type the answer to this one for you, Keith. It's samatters.com. And so that'll be in the feed there for you. And now my question thing jumped around here a little bit. So let me find out back where I am in my question feed. All right. Jeff asked, do you have other topics online? Yes, I do. But I told you it's going to be a no selling zone here. So if you go to my website and you go to, if you're a first responder, click on first responder, and then there'll be a thing at the top that says training or training programs, and just click on that and search around. And if you can't find what you're looking for, then send me an email, because I don't want to do any marketing or self-promotion here on the website or on this program. Let me see if I can find another question here. So how do you interpret the difference between intuition? A lot of questions on intuition. How do you interpret the difference between intuition saying don't be here and other response? Oh, I'm sorry. I already answered that one. Let me scroll down here a little bit. There we go. What is your take on Colonel Grossman's physiology response or responses under stress, like yellow, red, gray, black zones, and situational awareness? Compatible. What I'm teaching is not at all in conflict to what Dave Grossman teaches in his books of On Killing and On Combat. And what he said, essentially, for those who aren't aware, he just says we go through different levels of our physiological and psychological response to stress. Like in the normal day of living at home in our pajamas, we might be in the yellow zone. And then I'm just kind of like, making this up. Somebody knocks on our door and the dog starts barking and we weren't expecting anybody at the door, and that might elevate our vigilance up a little bit because we don't know who's there and what they want, and then we might hear them, so that might elevate us to the red zone, and then we might hear them trying to jimmy the door and get into our house, and then that might elevate us into the black zone of stress, and how, and I didn't spend a lot of time in this program talking about stress and the stress reaction, because I want to keep it to a 1-hour event. But what I would teach related to stress, although I don't teach the yellow, red, gray, black, I teach the concepts of how our physiology changes based on differing or elevating levels of stress. The same as Colonel Grossman, nothing in conflict or in competition. In fact, he learned what he's teaching in the same places that I learned what I'm teaching, and that is in the research of stress and decision making, and all those research studies are out there for anybody who would feel nerdy enough to want to immerse yourself in it. In fact, my PhD research is in a book, so if somebody wanted to see all the stuff that I did, it's available out there, just like you can get David's book, you can get Gary Klein's book on intuition. I've got some books out there too. So let me see. Comment. There is a difference between acting on intuition to prevent, like, evacuation before collapse versus sending people into a situation on intuition, period. Post-event, it may no longer be just criticism. Don't stop thinking. You hit it on make predictions. Oh, okay. All right. This comment, it says great topic. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I don't want you to stop thinking, even if you get an intuitive response. I don't want you to just, in fact, I want to discourage you from going full automatic without conscious thought, because there's too much bad that can happen when you go full automatic in a high risk situation. Sometimes we will, sometimes we can't control it. Sometimes it happens so fast, we take an action so quickly that we didn't even really think about it. So one more question, it says, will you be uploading the recording to this webinar? Yes. Now, I'm new to the whole Zoom webinar recorded sharing experience. So what I think I can do, if I'm understanding it right from Zoom, is they will give me a link to the recording, and then I will send all of you an email that includes a link to the recording. And you didn't sign up for my newsletter, so you're not going to, get monthly emails from me. You're not going to get any marketing or promotion emails from me. This is a no selling zone, and I'm staying true to it. When you get the email from me, it will just be the link to the recording of the session. All right, so I'm curious if there's folks still here. Let me see how we're doing for time. Yeah, we still got lots of folks here. So let me just ask if there are any more questions, put them over in the question box. But if you could, over in the chat box, I'd like to hear how this pandemic is affecting you. I'm just curious for your own stress levels, or your own, whether you're still working or not working, working from home, whether you're essential, whether you're a first responder or healthcare provider. I'd just be curious as to how the pandemic is affecting you. So if you got questions, put them over in the Q&A box. If you have a comment about how the pandemic is affecting you, then just type it over in the chat box. And again, you can feel free to go when you want. And if you want to hang out here and chat with me for a little bit, I'd be glad to do that as well. So let me see where we're at here with how everybody's doing. Carol says, still here working from home. Yeah, that's I'm here, I'm home, but not working so much, Carol, other than like these free events. But other than that, not too much work coming my way these days. Jerry in Pennsylvania says, we're a volunteer department and it's impacting us big time. And I can imagine, because they get full-time jobs, they might be at home with their kids, they might be off work. I can understand that. Tim said being retired, not minding it a bit. Yeah, just kind of like another day in the world of retirement, right, Tim? Only stress is from deferred comp investments taking a hit, and hopefully that'll bounce back. And I think that it will, Tim. You think about, if you look in history of the events that have been economically impactful, we have always rebounded. Now, sometimes that rebound has been fast, and sometimes the rebound has been slower. And what I would predict, and I'm not the expert in this area, but I have paid attention, because I'm of the age that I have some 401k invested that I want to make sure is going to be there when I actually retire. Is I think that we could easily see a 2 to 3 year rebound of the market, and it might happen in still this year. I mean, I don't know. Even the experts don't know, but I totally understand how that definitely is a concern. Ken in Missouri said that there's full PPE on every call, and wow, that's unto itself got to be stressful. Richard said that he's an essential worker. Thank you, for Richard, for your service. Training officer for Winnipeg Fire, professional fire department, just north of me here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. Working from home, but also called in as our roles are fluid during this time. Boy, no kidding. And I feel for all of your folks on the front line there, Richard. Here's Phil from Alberta said, we're not as impacted as you are in the US, but the shutdown is affecting us economically. And yeah, I totally get that as well. And everybody, it doesn't feel any better to say everybody's in the same boat, but I think everybody's in the same boat for sure. So any other questions, throw them in the Q&A. Any other chat, you can just throw into the chat box, and I'll chat with you. I don't want to keep you here longer than you want to be. When you want to go, just go. If you want to even talk with me about something that's off topic, I feel free to do that. And we can have a chat. Dustin says, as the fire chief for municipality, it's affecting me by causing me to work from home and interact with my members less. Yeah, I totally get that. And that's really tough. It's put a little more stress on, resistance, fear from the volunteer firefighters due to the potential that they could be exposed on a call and bring the virus home to their family. We've instilled confidence in the department, but using by using webinars to provide updates on the pandemic, as well as providing more online training to keep their minds busy. Hey, that's a great idea. Keep them, Dustin, you get it. For others, build some semblance of normalcy in. You can't get together and do live training, but you can get together and do Zoom-based meetings, Zoom-based, and I say Zoom, that's just because that's the platform I use. I'm not trying to sell you Zoom, but virtual-based training sessions. I just did one session. Well, I had a department I'm doing 4 virtual training programs for, not on this topic, on a different topic, 4 of them for their on-duty personnel, because like you said, Dustin, they want to keep some semblance of training in their organization. So they're continuing to try to be creative and find ways to train online and train virtually. Um, let me see, what else do I have here as questions or comments. Roy in Iowa said, "Anybody want 2 kids?" I'm guessing there's a little stress coming through there. So in the chat box, if you want to take Roy's kids, that might even raise an interesting question for the chat. How are things going with homeschooling the kids? I've seen a lot of interesting slash funny memes on social media about parents who are now having to attempt to homeschool their kids and to deal with that. And so I'll just swing back and say, if you want to give your kids an assignment, have them attend this situational awareness program as an assignment, and then you could even have them report out to you what it was that they learned during the 1-hour program, and kind of make it an assignment, a homeschooling assignment